You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 85 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Now, a while ago, I was having a conversation with Matt Hanley. You may remember Matt. He's been on the podcast a few times, and he's actually the guy that did the intro to my book. And we were talking about Mark Cuban and the situation that was developing. Well, it wasn't developing at that time. I shouldn't say that, but it was coming to light about the treatment of women at the Dallas Mavericks organization. And me and him got into a little bit of a heated debate. I was on the phone as to whether or not Cuban should be fired. I felt like he should have been fired based off what I was hearing. This is even prior to the investigation. And he was adamant that it was a different set of circumstances. And I was going to do a podcast, but he based off this topic, but he did talk me out of it. And his point was that I should wait until the investigation is concluded. Now, I wasn't going to listen to him. I very rarely listen to people when it comes to my show and what I should or should not put up. But he did say that I did not want to make the same mistake that the media did when it came to the Duke lacrosse players. And I thought that's a fair point. So I'll wait for the investigation. However, I was skeptical that the investigation would be transparent. Because quite honestly, anytime there is a conflict of interest with investigations, and it's nothing personal towards Cuban, it's just when I can see the benefit to try to cover something up, whether it's Major League Baseball and steroids, or political parties trying to cover up corruption, or companies trying to cover up exploitation. Man, there's a lot out there. And whenever I can see that they've got a real vested interest to at least attempt to cover something up, to lower some of the heat from the public, even if that's come out later on, if the truth does come out, they will have survived that initial backlash even by delaying it. Then I'm skeptical. And even the timing of this, you've got to question it, truly, because look at when this investigation concluded. It came when the NBA is least popular. It's before training camp, and American football has kicked in, especially here, because I'm in America, duh. But on a collegiate level and the pros, it's starting to gain momentum. You've got Major League Baseball, the playoffs are about to begin. And apart from the real diehard fans, basketball is not on anybody's mind. It's really not even on my mind, to be totally honest with you, at this stage of the year. So you've got to question, because I didn't even hear about this. I don't have ESPN. I don't have cable. I subscribe to NBA League Pass. That's how I watch it. But, this was sent to me. And because it was sent to me, I was like, I should probably cover this, because I said I was going to cover it. I remember I received some questions about it when I was doing the mailbag, and I didn't do it because of this, and I answered it that I was going to wait, based off what Matt Hanley had talked me into. So what I'm going to do is I don't even know what the findings are. I was sent the links, so I don't know if they're all over the place, because there's 3 links that I was sent. So what I'll do is I'll play it, and I'll respond whether I agree or disagree. I might be pleasantly surprised, but once again, I'm very skeptical that I will be pleasantly surprised. So I'll send it over to the first clip, and from the thumbnail, it looks like Rachel Nichols is talking, and I think she actually interviews him based off the other interviews too, the other sections. So let's get right into it.
Just a short time ago, the NBA released its report on what's been going on in the Dallas Mavericks offices for the past 2 decades, and the findings are, in Commissioner Adam Silver's words, quote, disturbing and heartbreaking.
You know what? Talk is cheap. I don't know what the report is yet, but let me just cut in straight away, because it's one thing to get up and say, oh, this is disturbing and heartbreaking, bust out the violins, whatever. But if it's as bad as what it looked, right? And once again, I'm jumping to a conclusion. It may not be as bad, but he's already saying disturbing and heartbreaking. And he's willing to take such huge stances on Donald Sterling or transgender bills and basically punishing the basketball fans of Charlotte for something that was democratically voted in the state of North Carolina, if he's going to have that hard line of a stance and that backbone, he sure as hell has to come up with something substantial for this. Violence against anybody is not okay. And if this is going to be a slap on the wrist, basically, if anything short of Mark Cuban not getting fired or forced to sell the team, it's unacceptable. And I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for that, which is okay. I can live with that because I get that I've gotten a lot of the audience that I've received on here is largely conservative because in today's sports journalism world, there's no room for anybody to the right of Bernie Sanders, pretty much. It's very rare. So whenever I say that Cuban should be fired for this, I'm just going off the standard that was set by Adam Silver himself with Donald Sterling. And yeah, all right, we're going to get into the semantics. Sterling wasn't fired, but he was forced to sell the team when he didn't want to sell the team. So that's essentially being fired, right? So the point that I'm making here is if Adam Silver is genuinely heartbroken and distressed or disturbed, whatever it was, then we should be seeing a very stiff punishment to the Dallas Mavericks.
The investigation, which was launched about 7 months ago after an explosive story in Sports Illustrated, was done by an outside firm that spoke to 215 current and firmware employees and examined more than 1.6 million documents, emails, and text messages.
You know, this could simply be the tip of the iceberg to it. I'm not talking about other franchises. I'm just talking about what happened with Dallas. Because when you think about it, okay, the emails, how many of those are potentially deleted, right? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what kind of backup system they had or what kind of access this firm had to those backups, if they were backed up. And also, if a lot of it is hearsay from interviews, which is what Rachel Nichols says was their first source, wouldn't it be if it was as... I'm just saying, this is why I get skeptical of things of this nature, especially if it's an investigation by the NBA that more than likely wants to cover it up, or the Mavericks themselves. I'm just presenting this as a question. Would it not be in the employees' best interests to try and cover this up themselves as well? Because one, they may be guilty themselves of this, or two, if it's so bad that it forces the NBA to get rid of Mark Cuban, and Mark Cuban has to sell the team, is it then possible that their jobs are at risk? This is why I'm skeptical when you have internal investigations.
And here is what they discovered. A toxic workplace where women regularly went to work every day, having no idea whether one of the men in the office would try to kiss them, press them for sex, threaten their jobs, play pornography in front of them, or in one man's case, take them on a tour of the arena that would include a mandatory stop at his apartment.
And already we know that this whole investigation meant nothing because we already knew all this. Nothing new has come out despite what Rachel Nichols said or whatever it was in this report, that it was 1.5 or whatever it was million emails that was checked and countless interviews. They couldn't find anything else. So this was a cover-up. Immediately, we already know it's a cover-up. And that's so disappointing. And I'm not out for blood or anything. I just want the truth to come out.
Each time one of these incidents happened, management decided it didn't consider any of the men's behaviors fireable offenses. One woman who worked for the Mavs showed up to work with bruises and swelling on her face and chest and arms, and informed management she had been beaten by her then-boyfriend, who was also a Mavericks employee. That man is named Earl Sneed. And Sneed, who had already pled guilty to charges he had beaten his previous girlfriend, was not fired. In fact, in the first incident, Mark Cuban had offered to pay his legal fees.
You know, the thing that I was interested about in this is to see how the sports journalists would actually react. Because Mark Cuban is considered a darling by them. He's an outspoken Democrat, anti-Trump, all that stuff. So he ticks all the boxes. He's kind of like the LeBron of of NBA owners in terms of how he's treated by the media. And it's kind of cool. It's kind of interesting and surprising to see that Rachel Nichols already is going after him the way that he needs to be going after. He needs to be held accountable. I'm not saying he did these acts. I'm not saying he should be held accountable as if he was the one that actually orchestrated it. But in terms of enabling it and in creating a culture where it empowered people to do so, knowing that, hey, your legal costs will be paid for by the owner, whether he knows it or not, which is nonsense. But I'm very glad to see already that she's willing to show why he is held account and not give him an outlet so we can manipulate the audience into thinking that he is somehow the victim.
The investigation also found that in particular, 15 women were harassed by the man who served as the Mavericks president and CEO for nearly 20 years, including the first 15 years Cuban owned the team. That man's name is Terdima Ussery, and Cuban has maintained since this story broke, he had no idea about Ussery's behavior or the culture Ussery had enabled.
Look, what, 15 years? Is that what I don't want to play back. She said 15 years though. He was there for 20 years and 15 years was when Cuban ran the team. But somebody who claims to always have this finger on the pulse and understand business and oh my goodness. And he's claiming that he didn't know. And yet he was paying legal fees. Maybe not for this guy, but for other guys. If you buy this, if you really believe this story that he didn't know, man, I got some Enron shares to sell you. I've got a lot of them. Trust me, they're good. I don't know if the company's gone bankrupt or not, so you can't sue me later. But I've got some to sell you now. It's a pretty big company.
That investigators deemed to be true. Not one of those 215 people they interviewed said that they told Cuban about Ussery, and no emails or text reflected Cuban knowing either.
Bullshit.
But Cuban did obviously know about Snead and a few other isolated incidents involving another employee named Chris Hyde.
You know what? That's all you need to know, that was absolute bullshit. Because the course of action was identical. To ignore it or to enable it. If there was such a different, if we saw contradictory, if we saw him firing people when he did know about it, as opposed to enabling it, then I'd say, yeah, maybe he didn't know. But it's the exact same course of action. So I guarantee you he knew. I would bet everything I have that he knew.
And regardless, the NBA is holding Cuban accountable for what was going on in his shop, as it should. The league announced today Cuban has agreed to donate $10 million to women's organizations. That's 4 times the $2.5 million maximum allowed by the NBA Constitution. Although it is also relevant to note, last year Forbes estimated Cuban's net worth at around $3 billion. There are no basketball-related penalties being assessed, and Cuban will still get to own the team.
Hold on a second. Wait, that's the penalty? There's no basketball. I get there's no basketball-related penalties. That's fine. I get that. But that's the penalty for Cuban? A $10 million, essentially a fine, which he's got. Oh, Jesus. If you tell me that this isn't a cover-up. Wait, what were the words that he used before, Silver? Disturbing? And I can't remember the other adjective he used, but it's meaningless. $10 million. Okay, $10 million is a lot of money. But quite honestly, that's going to be a tax write-off because it's a donation. That doesn't even hurt him. That's... They want to talk about enabling? Adam Silver's enabling this. Because what precedent does this set to other owners? Oh my goodness. This is unbelievable. I'm not surprised. I am not surprised that it turned out like this. And I would bet everything that I have that Cuban knew about a lot more than he's letting on, obviously. And there's a lot more in terms of this investigation that just will never see the light of day because they want to justify this weak punishment.
The league has mandated a top-to-bottom overhaul of the Mavericks office. That includes firing not just the perpetrators, but the men who enabled them. So
then Mark Cuban should go as well.
As well as elevating a number of women to leadership positions.
Oh yeah, that's going to really solve everything. Unbelievable. That's their response. That's the response. They let this dickhead stay on, And then their answer is that he has to donate money, which will be a tax write-off. And for somebody with as many businesses as he has, believe me, he'll get all of that back in terms of the tax write-off. And then to fix the Mavericks, they're going to just simply elevate women to positions of power. That does not solve anything. This is just a superficial Band-Aid. It's not even a Band-Aid. It's just a superficial response. There's no substance to it whatsoever. Honestly, the only answer was to get rid of Cuban. That would have sent a loud message to every single NBA owner out there to make sure that this never happens again. Now, boy, this wasn't even a slap on the wrist. This was somebody who put their hand in between the person's wrist and slapped their own hand to make a lot of noise.
And instituting strict new measures to encourage the reporting of and punishment of this kind of behavior. Here's Adam Silver's complete statement, quote, "The findings of the independent investigation are disturbing and heartbreaking, and no employee in the NBA, or any workplace for that matter, should be subject to the type of working environment described in the report. We appreciate that Mark Cuban reacted swiftly."
What the... He is thanking Mark Cuban? I try my best not to curse in this on this podcast. Oh my goodness. He's actually thanking Mark Cuban? Unbelievable.
Thoroughly and transparently to set the allegations as they were first set forth in Sports Illustrated, including the immediate hiring of Cynthia Marshall as CEO to effect change.
Oh, eat a dick. To effect change. If he was sincere, he would sell his team. He wouldn't have to be forced into it. His punishment, as I said, his punishment was to donate money. And you know what? Donating money is a tax write-off. You get that back. If you are making enough money, you can write that off as a tax write-off. It is that simple. If anybody has done any type of... if you've ever run a business, you know that if your expenses are high enough, you can virtually write off anything. And this will be considered as a basketball-related or a business-related expense. That was his punishment. And this is insulting. This is so insulting to the victims of this that he is now being applauded for transparency. Oh, give me a break. Give me an absolute break. Oh, but don't worry, guys. Don't worry. It's okay. He hired a woman as a CEO. He loves women now. He loves women. Jesus.
But as Mark has acknowledged, he is ultimately responsible for the culture and conduct of his employees.
Then he should be gone. It is that simple.
While nothing will undo the harm caused by a select few former employees of the Mavericks, the workplace reforms and the $10 million that Mark has agreed to contribute are important steps toward rectifying this past behavior and shining a light on a pervasive societal failing, the inability of too many organizations to provide a safe and welcoming workplace for women.
You know, I was at university not too long ago, so I'm going to get a little bit personal here, but I was at university until fairly recently, right? And so I was at essentially the epicenter of third wave feminists / SJWs, all that nonsense, right? So I've seen virtue signaling before, but this one takes the cake. This one absolutely takes the cake. For somebody who was shown the backbone and the spine to force Donald Sterling to sell his team for a comment that he made in private on the telephone, which was recorded without his consent. And I'm not defending him, but I'm just saying what happened. For somebody who also removed the All-Star game away from the Charlotte Hornets because the state of North Carolina voted in favor to keep traditional bathrooms. Males go to the male bathroom, females go to the female bathroom. And that was viewed as transphobia or whatever, right? And he's shown the spine to do that. But yet when there is actual physical violence in perpetrated in an NBA organization, and the owner is paying for their defense. I don't mean to be laughing. I'm not laughing at the situation. I'm laughing at how ridiculous this is. And that's their response. That's his response. That's the NBA's response. And he wants to say these are positive steps. This is a disgrace. It really is.
To me, the fact that the league is being thorough and transparent here, that matters. I'm not sure the penalty is harsh enough. I certainly wouldn't have complained if it was more. But ultimately, more than debating just how much of a pound of flesh can be extracted here, I am personally so much more concerned with a real, honest change in the culture and the opportunities for women, not just in Dallas, but around the NBA.
Well, I think you should be concerned. When you look at what the response was, it's a disgraceful response. It is a pig's ass about transparency because it was an internal investigation that shed no real new evidence as to what we saw in the Sports Illustrated article, which is a load of crap because if it was 1.6 million emails, not 1.6, but 1.6 million emails and hundreds of employees interviewed, you can't tell me that nothing else came to light there. You also can't tell me that Cuban didn't know when he had that guy running the organization for 15 years. So there was no transparency there. So if you're a woman in the NBA and you see this kind of response, this kind of penalty, it wasn't even a penalty. It was more of a public shaming than anything, but it wasn't a penalty. Then yeah, you should be concerned because nothing happened. If anything, people are thinking, well, if that's a penalty, then have at it.
And I still feel Mark Cuban has some significant explaining to do. To that end, I've been asking Mark to come on The Jump for an interview for months, and he kept telling me he would do it when the report was released. And now that it has been, he's kept his word.
All right, so that's the end of the first clip, thank God. But I guess it's going to get worse because we're going to hear from Cuban himself. But keep in mind what a manipulator that Cuban is. And he's going to turn it around. I'm assuming, I haven't listened to it. So, I mean, once again, I leave myself vulnerable to being wrong here. I hope I am wrong. But I'm going to expect a lot of deflections. I'm also going to expect a lot of damage control. We're going to see him try to separate from, I guess, the evil aspect of what's happened. He's going to try to point out that he had nothing to do with it. He didn't know what was going on. But then he's going to be claiming responsibility of what could have happened or what should have happened. And also, I guess, promise a better future, i.e. it's not going to happen again. In short, he's going to basically try to take responsibility while simultaneously taking no responsibility. That's what I'm expecting. But let's hear what he's got to say for himself.
I want to welcome Mavericks owner Mark Cuban to the show. And Mark, I appreciate you being here. I want to just sort of start there and get your reaction to this report as it came out.
First, just an apology to the women involved, the women that in a couple cases were assaulted, and not just to them, but their families.
Listen to this motherfucker. Listen to him. He's trying to talk as if he's the heartbroken one here, when he was paying the legal representation for the people that he is apparently so appalled at. He is appalled that he got caught. That's it.
Because this is not something that just is an incident and then it's over. It stays with people, it stays with families, and I'm just sorry I didn't see it. I'm just sorry I didn't recognize it.
You hear what he said just then? He's sorry that he didn't see it and he's sorry that he didn't recognize it. Implying that had he had seen it and had he had recognized it, he would have done something about it. Separation of evil. As well as apologizing for what should have happened. As opposed to... There's no way that he did not know what was going on there. Or that he had no idea whatsoever. Or the slightest inclination of what was happening. This organization, his organization that he's so proud of for whatever reason, that this organization, not only did he pay for legal representation for these scumbags, but they had actual policies in place so females wouldn't be around one of these scumbags. The beat reporter that they had, I can't remember his name, but it was a guy that Cuban actually gave a job to via an email. This guy emailed him and reached out to Cuban via his blog, and he gave him a job. They actually, instead of addressing the issue, you can't tell me he did not know about that. You can't tell me about that. You can't say that he didn't know about that. And this is the excuse that he's actually going to roll with? Think about this. This entire situation, the explanation that he's running with that he didn't know, and he has somehow turned into the biggest nothing of a penalty that you'll ever see in your lifetime, may actually do so much more harm to women and their progress or whatever in the sports world, in the male sports world, it'll do more harm than good. Because think about it, NBA teams may have not wanted to embrace this culture out of fear of what may happen. They may have their teams taken away, especially after Donald Sterling. Now, after seeing this charade of a punishment, teams might think, well, that's nothing. That's nothing at all. We can deal with that. No basketball-related penalties. I was able to keep my team, and all I had to do was donate money to women's charities, which I can write off tax.
And I just, hope that out of this, we'll be better, and we can avoid it, and we can help make everybody just smarter about the whole thing.
Shut up. Just shut up. You had how many decades to fix this? And the only reason that you are acting concerned is because it's in the spotlight now, and your reputation is on the line. And honestly, your team should have been on the line, but that didn't happen. But just stop with the fake groveling and stop pretending that you actually give two shits, all right? Because it's insulting to anybody that listens to this, and it's 100 times more insulting to the actual victims that you enabled.
You run an NBA franchise where you've talked a lot publicly about, everything that goes on there. You have the finger on the pulse.
Thank you, Rachel Nichols. Thank you for calling him out on his bullshit.
And you did know of a few of these isolated incidents. We'll get back to them. But even the best case scenario of you not knowing, the best version of this, is that women in your office felt unsafe coming to work, that they made official complaints to Human Resources, that they were threatened, they were not promoted. If you just didn't know any of this, how do you explain that?
I mean, I didn't know, and I don't have an explanation. I can give you lots of reasons, but they don't matter. What matters is it was my responsibility, it didn't happen, and I have to be accountable for it.
Forget for a minute the theatrics, with his voice being such a slow, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know this was happening. All we need is a violin in the background, honestly. But forget all that for a second. And he's saying that he has to be held accountable. How was he held accountable? How? If someone can explain to me, I'd be very happy how he was held accountable. This was not a $10 million fine. This was $10 million going to charities. I've said this before, I will say it again. That money is a tax deduction. It's tax deductible, especially when he owns the companies that as big as he has. Even if he just owned the Mavericks, that is a tax write-off. If he is serious about wanting to be held accountable, this is a joke. This is an absolute joke.
I think it's hard for some people to reconcile because you are respected as a smart businessman. You go on, you have a television show, and your build in that television show is you're a great businessman. So how do you match that up with what you're telling me here?
Look, in hindsight, it was staring me right in the face, and I missed it. I think.
Oh, shut up! Stop pretending you didn't know. If you didn't know, then you're not a great businessman. All right, and you're a pathetic liar one way or the other.
I wasn't as focused on the business as I should have been. When I talk about being actively involved, I could tell you every salary of every NBA player.
So what does that tell you about his priorities? That he couldn't give two shits if women are coming in bashed up, domestic violence, that HR has actually implemented strategies, legal defenses, and also strategies to segregate women from men, specific men, by the way. He's completely unaware of that, but he reckons that he knows every salary of every NBA player. What a load. What a load of crap.
Over the last 15 years. And, I would talk to Rick, and our coaches over the years and be there at practices and be there on the basketball side day in and day out, live it. It was, if I was in our business office 5 times in 15 years, that was a lot. It's embarrassing to say. There were people who I just hadn't met and hadn't talked to.
Although you did there's a lot of emails with you asking about ticket sales and marketing, so there are business side functions you work.
Thank you, Rachel Nichols. And also, we heard before that emails were sent directly to Cuban from his staff complaining about this that were ignored. I'm not sure if they came up in this investigation, but it was in the Sports Illustrated article. So don't give me this, he had to be inside the office to be aware of it. I hate doing this because it's different sports, but it's the same city. But can you imagine if this was Jerry Jones for the Cowboys, the owner of the Cowboys, what the media reaction would be, and how would they have gone this soft on him? Well, I guess Rachel Nichols hasn't really been that soft, but boy, she could go a lot harder than that.
No question. Look, I wanted, and it all ties back to the basketball. How are we going to fill the arena? And that.
No, it does not. And if you've been to an NBA game in the last 5 years, you know what I'm talking about. They'll have bobblehead night. They'll have posters for the 12th man night. They'll do pretty much every home game. There is some marketing campaign behind it. And it has very little to do with strategies, with coaches, or anything like that. And Jesus. But, if I was commissioner and I heard this, I would fine him $10 million just for this interview alone.
Was important to me, and that's where I had my greatest expertise. And I had a CEO that I deferred to, and it was a mistake.
Yeah.
Just when you think this guy can't lie anymore, he's just said his greatest expertise was basketball strategy, talking to Rick Carlisle, the coach, and the analytics guys or whatever. But his greatest expertise was a businessman. He doesn't have a basketball background. His basketball background is going to Mavericks games in the late 90s before he became a billionaire. He doesn't have a background in basketball. I would be surprised if he ever played competitively, let alone coached competitively. And yet here he is saying that his greatest area of expertise was not the business side of things, but the actual basketball side of things.
I'm going to talk about the CEO. One of the large focuses of this investigation is the dozen or so women who were victimized by Turdima Asuri. He was the man who was the Mavs CEO for 15 of the 18 years that you've owned the team. And I just want to read off some of this. He was cornering subordinates in elevators, he would kiss them, or he would stick his hand between their thighs. And it's clear in the report that you didn't know about that. The investigators interviewed 215 people. They looked through thousands of emails. I think the public can be assured you didn't know about that. Not one of the women said they came to you directly. But what you did know is that when you bought the team, that he had already been accused of some of this stuff and accused publicly enough that it made it into the local media.
Actually,
it was the subject of in the newspaper.
I didn't know that.
How do you not know that when you buy the team? It was in the newspaper. It was on the radio.
Yeah, I mean, I literally did not know it. I mean, the time, this was in 1998.
Oh, fuck off. You did not know that. When you buy a business, if you're smart, okay, when you buy a business, you are meant to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb and look it all over. And believe me, that includes employees. And if this was in the local media, then that is out there. And people would be aware of it. He's willing to go. I guess I'll give him credit for being willing to go down with this I didn't know thing. But as I said, if you are believing this, I have a bunch of Enron shares to sell you.
Mm-hmm. And I was writing broadcast.com, and I was eating, sleeping, and breathing that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was a Mavs season ticket holder and went to games, but I had no idea. Literally, from the time I talked to Ross Perot to the time I bought the team in January of 2000 was less than 6 weeks. I mean, should I have done due diligence? Should they have disclosed it? Yes.
Wait. So now he's blaming the previous ownership for not disclosing it. Oh, okay.
But I just, it was just, this was a dream come true. And should I have interviewed Turdima to make sure he'd be a good CEO and there weren't issues? Yeah, and I didn't.
I feel like I should probably interject here and give my thoughts, but when somebody just lies to you so much, whether it's in a short period of time or if it's over a long period of time, and you just shake your head. I'm shaking my head pretty hard right now. In hindsight, again, but I was just excited to buy the Mavs. I was excited, and it just never dawned on me that within my own company, within the Mavericks, that no one would reach out to me. But
do you understand why?
Yes,
with
absolutely.
the public presence you projected as being this tough boss, and then also with him being kept in that position for so long.
Yeah, I mean, look, we did a lot of things wrong, and I wasn't there to oversee him.
Once again, not taking responsibility. We did a lot of things wrong, but I wasn't there to oversee them. Whatever. Just stop making excuses. I mean, I get that this excuse got you out of trouble in this instance, but people with the ability to think are going to see right through this BS. And yeah, you may have fooled Adam Silver. Which I don't think you fooled him. He's just buddies with you. But at the same time, you haven't fooled any of us. We all know who you are. We know what you enabled and what you would continue to enable had you not been caught.
And so, yeah, everybody has every reason to question me. But I just wasn't there, and that was my fault.
I saw you just across the table make kind of a visceral reaction as I was reading some of this. When you read through the report and you really read the details of things that you hadn't known about before, what stood out to you as the most difficult and sort of what people had to go through? Just
the pain that they went through, my company.
Okay, so this is he's kind of he's trying to pretend to hold back tears here. It's wonderful how much he cares now. I'll leave it at that.
It was the same way I felt when I stood in front of Mavs employees for the first time after this came out. You know, and I apologize to them. It just never in my wildest dreams did I think that this was happening right underneath me. And the pain that people went through, the pain that people shared with me as this happened, the tears that I saw.
Don't buy into this. You know, this whole trying to present that he's heartbroken in all this is so he becomes a sympathetic figure. He's the reason this happened. He and he alone is the reason that the Mavs culture is what it was. And it would still be today if that article didn't come out. It's just that simple.
It hurt. And the way I felt was nothing compared to the way they felt.
If he was sincere about all this, see, some of you might think that I'm being too harsh on him here. But if he was sincere, his actions would reflect somebody that is sincere. It wouldn't have taken an article in Sports Illustrated for him to fix this issue. He would have done it without it if he was sincere. He's not sincere. It took, a fake investigation and public outcry for him to actually do something.
I mean, I guess just my nature. I mean,
your nature? You really said that? Your nature? I'll tell you what your nature is. Your nature is to do nothing. Absolutely nothing. Your nature is worse than that. Your nature is to virtue signal publicly about diversity and all this other nonsense, whilst behind closed doors of your own business, you enable this kind of ridiculous and backwards and abhorrent behavior to happen. That's your nature. And then when you get caught, you deflect. You pretend you're a master manipulator because now you are trying to present yourself as the victim. A second ago, you said how much it hurt you because you had to take responsibility in front of your Mavs employees.
Recognize I made a mistake, learn from it, and then try to fix it.
What
promise of the better future? That was stage 3 of damage control.
Was there a person who talked to you or sat across from you or someone who you've read about that it stuck with you? This thing happened and this is what just keeps me up at night?
It was just the looks on people's faces when I was sitting, when I first met with Mavs employees after this happened. And I didn't know, I didn't know how bad an actor Terdema was, right. And so I didn't know the degrees of everything, but I could just see it in everybody's face. I could see the pain in their face.
I don't believe that for a minute. You saw the pain in their face, yeah, sure, but you weren't feeling the pain. You were worried. You were scared shitless. You know why? Because you knew that this was going to come out. This is going to come out real bad, and you are so lucky that it's not David Stern as commissioner of the NBA, because you would be out faster than your head could spin, and that's saying something because he let a lot slide with Donald Sterling.
And these were people that I barely knew. and which is bad enough, but it just tore me apart.
Once again, in all of that, everything he's saying, he's recollecting, it had nothing to do with what they were experiencing. It was how it tore him apart. Master manipulation, once again. There is another clip. I'm tempted not to play it because I don't even think he deserves the airtime. But let's see what he has to say.
I do want to ask you about Earl Sneed, who you just mentioned. And frankly, this is the one, I have to tell you, Mark, I've known you for years and years. And when I read what happened here, I can't put together how the person I know and have talked to for a long time okayed a lot of this stuff. And for people who aren't familiar, Earl Sneed was the team beat writer for the Mavericks team website. One of them. And he was arrested outside the office, right at work, for beating his fiancée so badly he left her visibly bruised and with a broken wrist. She went to the hospital.
Quite honestly, this is really the point that I would be driving home to, because he was arrested at the Mavs office. And if you're a business owner of any size, you hear about this. You absolutely hear about this if you want to hear about it. But there's no way, especially for somebody who prides himself on having his finger on the pulse. And if he doesn't have his finger on the pulse, then he's a liar, which means he's probably lying about this too. It's just truly unbelievable that he actually thought that people would believe this. I mean, the only person that maybe believes it is Adam Silver. And even then, I don't think Adam Silver believes it. I think it was just the way that the NBA chose to try to cover it up. And this is even worse. This is even more pathetic of a cover-up than the NBA officiating crisis that's plagued the league for the last 25 years.
He pled guilty to that in court, and you not only didn't fire him, you offered to pay his legal expenses.
Well, no, okay, that's not from what the information I had was just coming from Earl. Okay.
So he was having information from Earl. So hold on, I'm confused here. He's saying that he had no idea what was going on, but yet he had an open line of communication with Earl? Why didn't he have an open line of communication with anybody else? Doesn't make any sense. It's totally inconsistent, and that's a sign of a pathological liar.
His fiancée emailed you directly also, according to the investigation.
Right. The information I had, though, came, I sent it back to HR, and then...
Once again, that doesn't make any sense. You just said the only information he had was from Earl, but then Rachel Nichols says that according to the investigation, which I am skeptical of because I think there's a lot more there, but according to the investigation, the fiancé, the one that was actually assaulted, emailed him directly. And he's saying, well, no, he didn't get that. And the only information he was getting was from HR. But then earlier he was saying that the information that he wasn't getting, that he was totally oblivious to what HR's policy, he was not communicating with HR. This is the same HR that decided it was a good idea to segregate this individual from all female employees because he was such a risk towards women. Once again, he's this rabbit hole that he has gone into because of a defense of I didn't know. He's getting caught out on it.
The information I got was from Earl, and again, one in multiple mistakes as applies here. I just took his word, and the first.
He just took his. Okay, let's try to unpackage that. He just took his word. He just took the word of somebody who has a history, an extensive history of violence against women so bad that HR has to segregate him from other women. He took that word and decided to pay his legal fees. I know that this term gets thrown around quite a lot, but this is truly disgusting.
First time. And again, I took his word. We didn't follow up. I didn't request an investigation. I didn't ask for the police report.
So you enabled it then? You enabled this? If what you were saying is true, that you did not ask for an investigation, you did not look for the police report, and you paid his legal fees just based off what he told you, I'm sorry, but you're an enabler. You absolutely enabled this. And before I get criticized of it, I am as far away from the feminist movement as you can see. I am not part of this whole Me Too nonsense, but this is unbelievable.
I deferred to the CEO.
Mm-hmm. There was a second incident, though. You said the first time he started actually dating a fellow coworker, and because you guys hadn't even suspended him or anything, the women in the office didn't know that he was someone who had beaten up his fiancée.
This is exactly why I called him an enabler.
Who had broken her bones, and that the other Mavericks employee, he got violent with her. She came to work the next day with visible bruises and swelling in her chest and face and arms.
Oh, how were they meant to know whether that was real or not? That could have been as fake as LeBron's broken wrist. I mean, what's a couple of broken bones and some black eyes? Especially when Mark Cuban has somebody that he can trust. Somebody with the integrity where he can just take his word for it.
And she said she didn't feel safe in the office. And again, you guys didn't fire him. And this is where I kind of break down on why.
We can have a discussion there.
Yeah, tell me.
Because, again, in hindsight, I would have done it differently.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an excuse. If I go out there and kill somebody and then my defense, when I'm charged for it and I'm being prosecuted, I'm saying in hindsight I wouldn't have done it, that's not going to make a difference. It doesn't bring the person back. And you are accountable, you are responsible for your inaction here. Therefore, you should have been punished. And I'm not talking about, as I said before, this nonsense of a $10 million donation, which will be a tax write-off.
Young African-American man, and this is 2014, and I had a decision to make. And the decision was, do I just fire him? And my fear, and it's documented in the report and talking to the investigators, my fear if I just said, okay, you're fired, what's he going to do next? And what happens to the next person? And that's what I was thinking to myself. And so
Is anyone else just shaking their head at this bullshit? He's saying, he's now admitting that he was aware. So all this nonsense that he was spilling before, that he had no idea that any of this was going on. Now he is admitting that he not only knew, but he made a calculated decision as to why he wouldn't just fire him. I'm lost for words here.
I set a series of rules for him that he had to be accompanied. He had to go to counseling, and there was a variety of things to keep an eye on him.
I know I'm not the first person to point out to you that you could have removed him from the workplace
and that's what I said.
and
that's
still
what I told
gotten him
right.
counseling.
No, in hindsight, you're exactly right. I'm just telling you what I.
You notice how quickly he went from being so quiet and somber to, in hindsight, he elevated his voice really quickly. Once again, he's not sincere at all with this. He knows what he's doing. This is damage control 101. There's no other way to describe it. This guy is putting on a show in a desperate attempt for sympathy and empathy when it's just a load of bullshit. That's all it is.
I thought, yeah, and I said the same thing publicly, and I said the same thing to investigators. If I had to do it all over again, I would fire him and still got him counseling.
What message do you think, now that you have gone through all of this, what message do you now know that this sent the other women in the office?
Oh, it's horrible.
That you basically told them, hey, one of the guys in this office can hit you, and we will keep him still here coming to the office and sitting next to you.
Again, I have no excuse. There's just, I should have done better, I could have done better, I've learned, and I just have, there's just no other way to put it.
There's no other way to put it because you're lying through your teeth and it's getting exposed in a relatively soft interview. So can you imagine if you had to actually have an interview or a hearing with somebody who isn't your friend or isn't going to be nice to you, how badly you'd be ripped apart? Because it's one of the worst excuses, cop-outs, that I've ever heard in my life. And I've heard some shockers, believe me. But this one tops them all.
I mean, in talking to you and reading all this, it does seem like another real lesson that you have absorbed through this.
No, that's not good enough. Somebody or an entire culture, scores of women getting abused in your office, in your organization, and it's meant to be a learning experience? Once again, can you imagine using this defense in the court of law? Oh, it was a learning experience, Your Honor. I didn't know she was saying no to me. It was a learning experience. Next time, I guarantee you, I will listen when she says no. Yeah, I don't think that would fly.
Is that it's not just about these specific behaviors, it's about the environment you set up, right? So even just as recently as the beginning of this calendar year, the report details that in your business office, so this isn't even just, oh gee, there's basketball players and trainers and of course they're male over on the basketball side, but just in the business office, 70% of the employees were male, only 30% were female. There were 0 women who were at the executive level to where they would be in the top level meetings. There were 0 people of color. And that even the women who did work there, their salaries were not competitive with sort of the commensurate men who did those jobs at other NBA franchises. What kind of environment do you think that set up in your business?
Well,
and
obviously
sort of
not a good,
the worth of women.
Right, obviously not a good one. And once it came to my attention, we immediately jumped in to fix it.
As opposed to when women are getting assaulted by an employee of yours and you were aware of it, you admitted you were aware of it, and you didn't jump to fix it? Interesting. Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny how when the spotlight is on a lot of these people on the left, and the spotlight shows how hypocritical they are in terms of this whole equality movement and diversity and all this, but isn't it funny how quickly they act? But when the spotlight isn't on them, we see what they really are. And that's why I always say action speaks so much louder than words.
You know, it wasn't one that was acceptable. It's not something that's going to happen going forward. We immediately stepped in and brought in a CEO that brought all this to my attention, and I gave her carte blanche to do what she needed to do because it's not right.
Wait, hold on a second. Your excuse for everything that was happening under the previous CEO was that you didn't know. But now you've given free reins to this woman, I don't know what her name is, to do exactly the same thing. What if this happens again? Are you going to use the same excuse again? What happened to learning from it? I thought you were going to be more hands-on to make sure that it would never happen again.
And it's not even good business. And so we're doing everything possible to fix it.
One of the things the NBA announced today is that you personally will donate $10 million to women's organizations, charities, and that is going to strike some people as very significant because the maximum the league is supposed to be able to fine a team owner is $2.5 million. So that's 4 times that amount. It will strike some people as, hey, this guy's a billionaire. That's not that significant at all. He didn't lose his team. He didn't, any of the more sort of basketball-related things. What do you think of that decision?
I think more important than the money is the example we can set.
The example that you have set is that you enabled this, and then you have used the most juvenile and pathetic defense or explanation of I just didn't know, which you admitted is a lie in this, by the way. So what kind of example has been set?
Because there hasn't been anybody who really has who had to go through this and set the tone on what's the right way to respond and what's the right thing to do.
You're right, because nobody has been has created such an abhorrent culture. Even Isaiah Thomas, when he was on the Knicks, hasn't had a culture this bad. Even Donald Sterling, with some of the ridiculous things that were coming out of his mouth, hasn't done anything as bad as this. So you're right, nobody has had to go through this. But that, once again, can you imagine if Charles Manson got up there and defended himself? That was his defense. It wouldn't fly.
And so the goal, even more than the money, is for me to get out there and
lie.
Teach others from my experiences.
Was there any point through all this where Adam Silver discussed selling the team with you?
No.
Was there ever a point you considered it yourself?
No. I don't run away from my mistakes.
I know.
Well, you sure as hell are not honest and upfront with them, because you've lied throughout this entire interview, as you have lied about this entire process.
I know that the day the Sports Illustrated article came out, you came down and addressed the Mavericks employees at the office. And there are former employees mentioned in this report who felt they had to leave the company, things were so bad, had to leave the profession because they couldn't get another job after sort of unceremoniously leaving your company. Have you called to talk to any of them, to apologize to any of them?
No.
Should you?
I mean, I don't know the circumstances. I don't know the individuals themselves because of the way the report's structured.
If one of those employees wants to identify herself and come to you and reach out to you to get some closure, are you open to that?
Yeah, I talked to the investigators because, again, I don't know what promises they made. I just don't know if I'd be the right person to try to solve it.
I wouldn't be.
This guy is such a coward. He is such a coward. He gets up, he just, in almost the same breath, he says he doesn't run from his problems, but yet when he's presented with a situation, a realistic hypothetical of an employee that was harmed in his work environment, reaching out and contacting, he said, I don't know if I'd be the right person to talk to them. Do you guys remember when David Stern, no, it wasn't David Stern, it was the head of the referees, I can't remember what his name was, but he said that Mark Cuban was not fit to manage a Dairy Queen, and I think he's completely spot on here. He's just an example of somebody who lucked in and lucked out at the right time with broadcast.com, and he's got no clue. He's got absolutely no clue. It's just a manipulator and a pathological liar.
Be surprised if somebody would like to talk to you personally. So
I'm not closing any doors.
Yep.
I'm just trying. I don't want to violate the privacy. You know what I'm saying.
So the final phase of the investigators' report is recommending changes, check marks that they have for your organization. So I want to talk about that in the next segment. And I want to bring in the new CEO you've been mentioning throughout this, Cynthia Marshall. So she's going to join us after this, please.
Yeah, I'm going to cut it off there. I've had my monthly quota of bullshit for in the span of the last hour. That was episode 85 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. We did have scheduled for this week Mike Fry. That episode will be coming up next week. Actually, you know what? No, I'll put that up on Monday, and we'll have 2 episodes coming out next week. But thanks so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more fun in the next couple of episodes. But thank you so much. Take care, guys.